The rope burned before it tightened. That was the first thing Eliza May Turner noticed, the rough hemp rasping her skin as if even the fibers had an opinion about her guilt. The crowd had gathered in the square before dawn, boots crunching frost, breaths puffing white like small clouds of judgment. Someone had nailed a plank around her neck with blackened letters so bold they seemed to shout on their own, "Indian lover." Eliza stood on the crate with her hands bound, her pulse hammering loud enough to drown the murmurs. She thought of how odd it was that the sky looked so wide and innocent, pale blue and endless, while the town below it felt narrow and mean. She had done nothing wrong, nothing except choose kindness when cruelty was easier, and loyalty when silence would have saved her. Eliza had come to Red Willow Crossing 10 years earlier, a seamstress with nimble fingers and a spine straightened by grief. Her father had died in a rail accident, her mother soon after of a sickness no doctor could name. Red Willow promised work and forgetfulness. It delivered one of those, at least. The town sat near the river and the forest edge, where elk trails braided the undergrowth and the wind carried pine resin into the streets. People there lived by rules they pretended were laws: who you spoke to, who you traded with, who you looked at too long. Eliza learned quickly to keep her eyes down and her stitches tight. She learned that a woman could be useful and still invisible. It was the winter of the smallpox scare that changed everything. A storm had pressed the river flat with ice, and the trading post ran low on flour and medicine. That was when Eli, no last name, because the town preferred him without one, came to her door. He was from the people who camped upriver, the ones the town called Indians, as if a single word could erase 1,000 nations. He carried a bundle of rabbit pelts and a note written in a careful hand, asking if she could sew a coat for a child who shivered through the nights. Eliza had hesitated only long enough to invite him inside. She took the pelts, warmed tea, and stitched until dawn, the lamplight catching on her needle like a promise. From that night, kindness grew legs and walked. Eliza mended clothes, passed along news, translated letters. When the sickness crept closer, she boiled water and delivered broth to anyone who needed it, townsfolk and river folk alike. She learned names and stories, not because she meant to defy anyone, but because she believed names mattered. The town noticed, of course. They always did. Whispers followed her steps like burrs on a hem. Still, she kept going. She had learned early that grief is a weight that never gets lighter unless you set it down somewhere else. The accusation came like a slap. A boy went missing, Peter Collins, 10 years old, quick with a grin and quicker with his feet. The river rose that week, breaking ice into teeth. Fear found a face, and the town needed a villain. Someone remembered seeing Eliza speaking with Eli by the riverbank, remembered her passing bundles wrapped in cloth. Someone said she knew the forest paths better than she should. Someone else carved the letters on the plank. It was easier to believe in a wicked woman than in a cruel accident. By sunset, they had her. Now, on the crate, Eliza lifted her eyes to the crowd. She saw faces she had fed and fingers she had bandaged. She saw the baker who once cried on her shoulder after his wife died. She saw the sheriff, hat brim low, mouth a straight line, eyes refusing to meet hers. She felt a strange calm settle over her, a quiet like the moment before snow. If this was to be her end, she would not beg. She thought of the child's coat, of stitches even and strong. She thought of the river in spring, of how ice gives way to current. The rope creaked. The preacher cleared his throat. The sign thumped against her chest when the wind caught it. Somewhere, a crow laughed. Then, of all the impossible things, the undergrowth rustled. Heads turned. A small shape burst from the tree line, tumbling more than running, brown fur and clumsy paws, eyes wide with the bright shock of daylight. A bear cub, no bigger than a sack of grain, skidded into the square and froze. For a breath, the world held still. The cub sniffed, huffed, and waddled forward. It stopped at the crate and lifted its nose, catching Eliza's scent. She felt the tug then, a gentle insistence at her skirt hem, like a child asking for attention. The cub pawed, pulled, and made a sound that was more question than threat. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted. A man reached for a rifle and hesitated, eyes darting toward the forest. Eliza's heart leapt, not with fear, but with a wild, irrational hope. She remembered the story Eli had told her months before, by the river, about a cub whose mother had been taken by hunters. The people upriver had fed it through winter, warned each other to keep watch for a grieving sow. Eliza had sewn a small pouch then, filled it with dried berries and fat, and asked Eli to give it to the child who watched the traps. She had never thought she would meet the cub herself. She reached down as far as the rope allowed and whispered softly, not a command but a greeting. The cub answered by tugging again, harder this time, as if to say come. The forest answered too. A low sound rolled from the trees, a presence felt more than heard. The man with the rifle lowered it. Mothers clutched children. The sheriff swallowed. The rope creaked once more, not with tightening, but with the weight of doubt. Eliza met the preacher's eyes. Please, she said, her voice steady as a held note. The child by the river. He fell through the ice. We found his cap snagged on the willow roots. I tried to tell you. The words broke something open. Someone cried out. Another man remembered the willow. The baker remembered delivering bread to Eliza the night she came home soaked and shaking. The sheriff raised a hand, then another. The crate was kicked away, not from under her feet, but aside. The rope was cut. Eliza collapsed to her knees, the sign cracking as it hit the ground. The cub squeaked and pressed its nose to her hand, then ambled back toward the trees, pausing as if to check that she followed. The low sound in the forest faded. They found Peter's body that afternoon, downstream, tangled in reeds. Grief came, heavy and deserved. So did shame. The town gathered again, quieter now. No plank this time. The sheriff cleared his throat and spoke of fear, of mistakes made when fear speaks first. Eliza listened, her hands wrapped around a mug someone had pressed into them. She felt hollowed out and strangely full at once. When Eli arrived at the edge of the square, she met his gaze and nodded. No triumph, just relief. In the weeks that followed, Red Willow Crossing learned the slow work of repair. Eliza stayed. She did not have to. She chose to. She sewed and taught and listened. The sign was burned. The rope was buried. The baker named a loaf after her, and then renamed it something less obvious when she laughed. Children left berries at the forest edge. The cub was seen again, larger, its mother a shadow among shadows. Years later, when the story was told, and it was told often, it was not about the rope or the plank. It was about a woman who chose kindness when it cost her, about a town that learned too late and then tried again, and about a small, brave tug at a hem that reminded everyone of the wild threads that bind us. Eliza would smile at the telling and say, nothing. She knew the truth was simpler and harder. Humanity survives not because we are never cruel, but because we can still be moved, by mercy, by memory, and sometimes by a bear cub who refuses to let go.